Welcome back. You're here because you want to get straight to the facts, understand the complex stuff, and, well, really get it. That's what we try to do.
And today, we are diving deep into a story that's, frankly, incredibly important, but also deeply heartbreaking. It's about the Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshchyna.
Right. Her story really highlights the immense dangers journalists face, particularly when reporting the truth from occupied conflict zones.
It really does. We've looked at various sources about her life, her work, her capture, detention, and ultimately the really disturbing circumstances around her death.
It's definitely a tough story, but one we need to understand.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to really pull out the key facts, the core insights about Victoria's ordeal. We want to understand what happened and also what it tells us about, the bigger picture for journalism and human rights in occupied territories.
Okay, let's start with Victoria herself. Who was she? She sounds like an exceptionally brave person.
Oh, absolutely. By all accounts, Victoria was, young, very passionate. A journalist, yes, but also a really committed human rights defender.
And known for going into dangerous areas.
Very much so. She was known for her courage, reporting from Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, places where, frankly, the risks were just enormous.
And the awards she received, both during her life and after, they sort of underscore how vital that work was seen to be, don't they?
They really do. It shows the value placed on independent journalism, especially where truth is suppressed, even before, the worst happened.
What sort of stories was she actually chasing? What was her main focus?
Her main focus was documenting the reality under occupation. So the impact on civilians, potential war crimes, human rights violations, just the harsh truths.
Was that always her beat, or does she cover other things too?
Before the full-scale invasion, she was also tackling things like fair trials, freedom of assembly issues, even things like illegal construction in Kyiv. So a broad commitment to accountability.
And she wasn't working for a big international network with lots of resources, was she? This sounds like she was taking huge personal risks.
That's right. She was freelance. But working for really prominent Ukrainian outlets, Romotsky, Radio Liberty's Ukrainian service, Ukrainska Pravda, well-respected independent names.
So choosing to work that way really says something about her dedication.
It really does, just getting those stories out there.
You mentioned awards. Was her courage formally recognized?
Yes, thankfully. She received the Courage in Journalism Award back in 2022, a clear nod to her bravery.
And posthumously as well.
Yes, tragically. The 2025 Homo Homini Award, recognizing her human rights work.
One source described her as a rare, passionate type to risk her life. That just paints such a picture, doesn't it? Especially going into areas where Ukrainian media was banned, knowing just being identified as a journalist could mean prison.
Exactly. It really highlights the intense personal risk she was taking consciously again and again.
Okay, let's move to that final journey, August 2023. What do we know about how she disappeared?
Well, in August 23, she decided to try and reach Russian-occupied southern Ukraine again. She wanted to do more investigative reporting there.
Even after being captured before, that shows incredible determination.
It really does. That first capture in 2022 clearly showed the dangers, but her commitment just didn't waver. It led her to try again in 2023.
What specific things was she hoping to investigate this time?
Really significant issues. She planned to report on Russia's illegal elections in those territories.
Right.
Also, the consequences of the Kakhovka Dam destruction, which were huge,
Right.
and the very tense situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Critical stories.
All incredibly vital reporting, but in extremely dangerous places. How did she try to get there? What was the route?
She took quite a roundabout route, traveling through Poland, then Lithuania, Latvia, and then into Russia itself, hoping to cross into the occupied areas from there.
And when did anyone last hear from her directly?
The last contact was August 3rd, 2023. She spoke to her sister, mentioned she'd passed border checks. Didn't say precisely where she was at that moment, though.
And then silence. When was she officially reported missing?
Yeah, silence after that. She was reported missing to Ukrainian law enforcement on August 12th. Given where she was headed, the lack of contact was immediately a major red flag.
A huge cause for concern.
Definitely. And then, in September 2023, a Ukrainian body confirmed she'd been detained by Russian authorities. But because there was zero information where she was, why she was held, her condition, it was classified as an enforced disappearance.
Which is a serious human rights violation in itself, right? Hiding someone like that.
Exactly. It's when the state basically steals someone, hides them, and refuses to say anything. Makes it almost impossible to protect them or hold anyone accountable.
And as you mentioned, tragically, this wasn't the first time she'd been in Russian custody.
No, it was the second time. Back in March 2022, early in the full-scale invasion, she was held for about 10 days by the FSB.
Russia's security service.
Yes, near Mariupol. And during that first time, she was apparently forced, under duress, to record a video basically saying everything was fine with the occupiers as a condition for her release.
Just chilling. It really underscores the constant danger she was in.
It really does.
So after this second capture in August 2023, what do we know about her detention? It sounds like it was just horrific.
What's come out since?
Yeah.
It paints a very, very grim picture. She was held incommunicado for over a year.
Meaning absolutely no contact.
None. No family contact, no lawyers, nothing. And no formal charges ever made public. Just complete isolation. A classic sign of enforced disappearance and a massive violation of her rights.
Where was she actually held during that time? Do we know the locations?
Reports and later evidence suggest she was moved around, held in places known for, well, really harsh treatment, especially for Ukrainians. Initially, it seems she was in a sort of makeshift prison in occupied Melitopol.
Until when?
Until about December 2023, it's believed.
And then moved.
Yes. In December 2023, she was transferred to Pretrial Detention Center Number 2, SIZ-2, in Taganrog. That's actually in Russia proper.
And that place, Taganrog SIZ-2, it has a reputation.
A very disturbing one, yes. Widely reported for systematic torture and mistreatment, particularly of Ukrainian prisoners held there.
Kara, you hear more and more about these places. Is there specific evidence Victoria was tortured?
The forensic exam on her body, once it was returned, found, well, multiple disturbing signs. Abrasions, hemorrhages, a broken rib.
Oh, man.
And marks consistent with electric shocks, particularly on her feet. Strong physical evidence pointing to torture.
That's just hard to process. And wasn't there also testimony from someone held with her?
Yes, there was. A former cellmate, who stayed anonymous for safety reasons, gave some truly harrowing testimony.
What did they say?
They reported seeing significant scars on Victoria's body, including what looked like a knife scar. This person also confirmed torture with electric currents, used on sensitive areas. And disturbingly, they said Victoria repeatedly begged for medication she needed for health conditions, but her captors just ignored her pleas, deliberately.
And physically, she deteriorated terribly.
Tragically, yes. Reports say she lost an extreme amount of weight, fell below 30 kilograms, which is just dangerously low.
30 kilos? That's skeletal.
Yes. She apparently couldn't walk anymore, had to be carried on a stretcher. And even after a brief hospitalization, she was just sent back to the detention center and put in solitary confinement, just further isolation.
It's almost impossible to comprehend that level of suffering, which brings us tragically to her death. What are the confirmed details there?
Well, her death was officially announced on October 10, 2024. But the Russian authorities claim she actually died much earlier, back on September 19, 2024.
That's a big gap, almost a month.
Exactly. That discrepancy immediately raises huge questions about what really happened and the information they were releasing.
And getting her body back took a long time, too, didn't it? It must have been agony for her family.
A very long time. Her body was finally repatriated on February 25th, 2025. Part of a body exchange. But the way her body was returned, it was deeply disrespectful and raised even more serious suspicions.
How so? What was suspicious about the return itself?
Disturbingly, the body arrived tagged just with the number 757, and the Russian documents falsely identified the body as an unidentified male.
What? They misidentified her gender.
Deliberately, it seems. It was only when Ukrainian authorities examined the body closely they found a small toe tag with her actual name, Roshchyna, on it. That was the first real clue.
So they tried to obscure her identity.
It certainly looks that way. DNA testing was then done, confirming it was her with over 99% probability, though understandably her father is still seeking further independent confirmation, given everything.
And the physical state of her body, beyond the identification issues, was it indicative of mistreatment?
Very much so. The full forensic exam back in Ukraine found, and I'm quoting here, numerous signs of torture and ill treatment.
So clear physical evidence.
Yes. Although determining the exact cause of death was difficult, because of the body's condition, it was partly mummified, and because the Russians had already performed their own autopsy. But the overall findings were highly suspicious, pointing towards foul play.
What specific things raised suspicion during the Ukrainian examination?
Well, most alarmingly, several key internal organs were missing.
Missing? Which ones?
Specifically, the brain, both eyes, and a significant part of her trachea and larynx, her voice box area.
Why would those be removed?
Forensic experts suggest that removing those specific organs, especially the trachea and larynx, could be a deliberate attempt to hide evidence of how she died, like maybe strangulation or suffocation.
That's a horrifying possibility. Were there other physical signs pointing in that direction?
Yes, there was a noticeable bruise found on her neck. And maybe even more telling, a suspected fracture of the hyoid bone.
The hyoid bone in the neck.
Exactly. It's a small bone high in the neck, and fracturing it is often linked to strangulation. Also, her body had been marked with this Russian abbreviation, SPAS.
SPS. What does that mean?
Ukrainian experts think it might be a fabricated cause of death, possibly meant to stand for something like total failure of the arteries of the heart, basically, trying to claim a natural cardiac event to cover up a violent death.
So a potential cover-up.
But crucially, the injuries they did find on her body, the bruises, the broken rib, the marks, they showed clear signs of having happened while she was alive, which is undeniable evidence she was tortured and badly mistreated before she died.
The whole picture is just devastating. It screams potential war crimes. So what's being done now? Is there an effort to get justice?
Ukraine has opened a full war crimes investigation into her death. That's ongoing.
Okay.
And there are plans for more forensic exams, this time involving independent French experts, hoping to get more clarity on the cause of death and the extent of her injuries.
What about internationally? Is the world responding?
Yes, there have been strong, unified calls from Ukrainian authorities, obviously, but also from major international groups that protect journalists and human rights defenders.
Like who?
Groups like Frontline Defenders, the International and European Federations of Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. They're all demanding an immediate, independent international investigation.
And they're pointing the finger directly at Russia.
Absolutely. The consensus is clear. Russia must be held solely responsible for Victoria's death and for the safety of all the other journalists they're currently holding.
It really does hammer home the unique dangers journalists face in occupied areas, doesn't it? Where just doing your job makes you a target.
Completely. Victoria's case is just a stark, awful reminder of that. And we know, worryingly, that there are at least 30 other Ukrainian civilian journalists imprisoned by Russia right now, many held without any charges. It shows a pattern.
It's a pattern of silencing truth-tellers. Victoria Roshchyna's fate is undeniably tragic, a terrible reminder of the immense risks journalists take, especially under occupation.
And the key takeaways from her ordeal, they're just so disturbing. You see the targeting of journalists, the horrifying allegations of torture in Russian custody, and these deeply suspicious circumstances around her death and the state of her body.
It's not just random cruelty, is it? It suggests something more systematic.
It points to a concerted effort, to suppress information, control the narrative, and silence anyone trying to report independently from occupied areas.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What does a case like this reveal about how information and basic human rights are just crushed in these territories?
Exactly. And it forces us to ask, what is the international community's responsibility here?
Right.
What obligation do we have to protect journalists in these incredibly dangerous places?
Right.
And how can we actually hold perpetrators accountable? It really makes you reflect on just how vital a free press is, especially, perhaps most especially, in the most dangerous environments.